All right. Well, welcome everyone to Show and Tell Birth, Equity, and Justice, the second installment of our Show and Tell series on equity and justice in early childhood. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Vance Lewis. I'm a senior program manager with Promise Venture Studio, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Awara, head of strategic initiatives at Promise.
Hi, everyone. I'm Awara Adiagbo, and I am thrilled to be here. We have got a great show and tell lined up for you on a topic that I strongly believe needs a lot more attention. Before we get into it, I encourage you all to take a moment and share your name and where you're joining from in the chat.
So Promise is a nonprofit venture studio that attracts, supports, and connects people and capital to catalyze innovation and impact in the early childhood community. Today's event is part of our Show and Tell series, which highlights innovation and social entrepreneurship, addressing issues of equity and justice across the continuum of early childhood development. Today, we are focused on the perinatal stage, which we define as pregnancy through the first year postpartum. In 2 weeks, we will be hosting our next installment on equity and justice in early care and education. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to thank our supporters in this work. Without your support, feedback, and thought partnership, today would not have been possible. And a big, big thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your day to hear from this incredible lineup of innovators and social entrepreneurs advancing birth equity and justice for women and birthing people.
For some of you in the audience, this may be your 5th time attending Promise's Show and Tell event. For others, it might be your first. So let's just take a minute to recap what Show and Tell sets out to accomplish. First, we strive to bring together a diverse national community of current and potential investors, funders, and innovative social entrepreneurs in early childhood. Second, we try to frame some of the most important topics in early childhood by bringing together the perspectives of experts from across the field. Finally, and most importantly, we intend to create a forum for connection, support, and ongoing collaboration between today's presenters and each of you. We've intentionally designed Show and Tell to catalyze connections, and today we'll rely on your thoughtful engagement, curiosity, and generosity to make that happen.
Each presentation is short to help you get an overview of many exciting developments in the field at one event. Think of each presentation today as an opportunity to open a door and begin building a relationship. After each presentation, you'll see a poll pop up on your screen asking if you want to connect with the speaker, or if you're able to make a connection for the speaker. If you say yes, we'll share your email with them and they'll follow up with you. We'll also send you an email with more information about all the organizations you opt in to connect with today. Some organizations are looking for funding to catalyze their work, or a partner, or an advisor. For each, we hope you'll be inspired by their work and opt into connecting with them or making a connection to someone else you think can be helpful.
We'll move pretty quickly, so to stay oriented, we encourage you to follow along at this website. For each presenter, you'll see some key facts like their location and whether they're a nonprofit or a for-profit. You can also opt in to connect with each presenter at that website, share questions or ideas for the speaker, and share feedback on the presentation. All of these ways of connecting are an opportunity to increase the collective impact of our amazing community. I ask and challenge everyone here today to think about what you can give through this forum, whether it's constructive feedback, an introduction, a partnership proposal, or an investment. You'll also have access to all of these materials later through that same website, and those connection forms will stay open. So if something resonates later, please go back and connect. Today's event will cover Black maternal health, the role of community-based birthing professionals in birth justice, and interventions for medical providers. We'll split today into 2 parts. The first part, and the bulk of the event, will be presentations from innovators who are doing incredible work to advance birth equity and justice across the country. The second part of the event will highlight how social entrepreneurship is linked with policy innovation. We'll hear from a panel of trailblazers on their work with the birth equity bill package in Colorado, which was actually successfully signed into law this month. Birth equity and justice is a topic that is deeply personal to me as a Black woman who gave birth for the first time last year in the midst of a global pandemic. Throughout my pregnancy, there were moments of immense joy coupled with fear, which I know is common for many pregnant women. But as a Black woman, I also knew my experience was different, and I faced a different set of statistics when it comes to maternal and infant mortality. So my fear and uncertainty were different too. I wondered if my doctors would listen to me. I wondered if I was being given all of the information I needed. I wondered if I'd be able to advocate for myself when the time arose. Quite frankly, I wondered if my baby and I would make it out alive and healthy. And after a bumpy ride, including a hospitalization in my second trimester, I'm super happy to share that we did make it. I have a beautiful baby boy who's now 11 months old. I feel grateful and I feel lucky. But having a positive birth outcome should not be a matter of luck. Having so much race and identity-based fear and anxiety is totally unacceptable, especially in a country like the US where we have the resources. The maternal and infant health crisis for Black, Brown, and Indigenous birthing people and their children is unconscionable, and it's preventable. We can turn this tide by centering the perspectives, experiences, and needs of BIPOC communities in a strengths-based, holistic way. And I am so thrilled that we have the opportunity today to spotlight innovative solutions that are doing exactly that.
Prior to hearing from our first presenter, we feel it's important to ground everyone in shared definitions of topics and terms you'll hear about today. So first, it's important to understand that birth equity and justice fall under the umbrella of reproductive justice. Reproductive justice is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent and care for the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. It is central to equity and justice in early childhood. Birth equity and justice is one piece of reproductive justice. Birth equity, as defined by one of our presenters today, the National Birth Equity Collaborative, is the assurance of the conditions of optimal births for all people with a willingness to address racial and social inequities in a sustained effort. Birth equity is inclusive of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Birth justice is a movement that believes when birthing people recognize their innate power to make the best health decisions for themselves and their families during all stages of the pregnancy, birth, and post-birth period, that power will have a transformational impact on their family and community. Birth justice involves the following elements, which our presenters will collectively touch on today: educating the community, challenging the abuses by medical personnel and overuse of medical interventions, advocating for universal access to culturally appropriate birthing person-centered healthcare, the right to choose whether or not to carry a pregnancy, and the right to choose when, where, how, and with whom to birth, including access to traditional and indigenous birth workers, such as midwives and doulas, and the right to breastfeeding support.
Throughout today's presentation, many of our presenters will share what's driving them in this work. Some may share traumatic experiences. We just want to acknowledge that this content may be difficult, so we encourage you to do whatever is needed to take care of yourself in those moments. Each of the leaders today will also highlight how their work is leading to more equitable and just outcomes for BIPOC communities and how you can help them achieve greater impact. All right, we are ready to jump in. I am so excited to introduce Kylie Mayfield from National Birth Equity Collaborative. Kylie will talk to us about how we can shift the current narrative of racial inequities in Black maternal health.
Hi, I'm Kylie Mayfield, Policy Analyst at the National Birth Equity Collaborative, an organization that's dedicated to eliminating racial inequities in maternal and infant health outcomes. Our vision is that all Black mamas, babies, and their villages thrive. The evidence is clear and the data are alarming. In the United States, despite being a high-income country that spends more money on healthcare than any other industrialized nation, Black families more frequently experience unfavorable birth outcomes. Black birthing people die 3 to 4 times compared to people of other racial backgrounds. Black infants are twice as likely to die before reaching the age of 1 compared to white infants. This means that Black families are less often able to celebrate their child's first birthday. This also means that Black families more frequently carry the associated financial, mental, and emotional burdens. For decades, we focused on individual behaviors of pregnant people, ignoring whole systems and structures that create environments for health and well-being. MBEC wouldn't exist if we didn't believe that this could all be different. Infant health is intertwined with the health and well-being of women and birthing people. A healthy and supported parent is more likely to have a healthy child. We believe that investments in maternal health can make significant improvements in the health of infants. We have an opportunity to shift the narrative about Black babies and the mamas that birth them. This narrative and culture shift is imperative to ensure that Black women and birthing people are deemed as worthy of receiving quality, respectful, and holistic maternity care services. This shift also ensures that environments change to support optimal maternal health. Shifting the narrative positions us to center community voices and identify opportunities for systems-level change. In collaboration with birth equity and reproductive justice activists and researchers, MBEC developed the Cycle to Respectful Maternity Care, an actionable framework designed to change the culture of the healthcare system. We're partnering with Black Mamas Matter Alliance, American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, OVIA, and Johns Hopkins to implement the framework. We're currently building relationships with community-based organizations and communities across the United States to pilot the framework in 2022. This is an extension of our work training healthcare institutions on addressing racism and bias and promoting birth equity. We recognize that we're joining other Black women-led reproductive justice, health equity, and human rights organizations. Each of us has a role in dismantling structural racism and addressing racial health inequities in maternal and infant health. Ask yourself what role you can play. If you're a hospital system, do you disaggregate data on severe maternal morbidity by race and ethnicity? Do you have a data dashboard? And do you release data in a timely manner for effective quality improvement? For everyone, how are you collaborating with and centering community-based organizations? Do you support legislation to improve maternal and infant health disparities? Achieving birth equity requires advocating for state and federal legislation like the 2021 Black Maternal Health Momnibus, a federal legislative package to address the Black maternal health crisis. I am invigorated by Black women-led community-based organizations who, like MBEC, have poured so much of themselves into their communities. Your presence today illuminates the collective power that we can leverage to ensure that all babies, all Black babies, survive to their first birthday and thrive into healthy children and adults. Collaboration is core to our values, so we look forward to partnering with you to drive us toward this vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. I especially appreciate you calling out that there's a role for each of us and a call to action in shifting this narrative. For our audience, if you want to connect with Kylie and support her work in shifting the narrative in Black maternal health, please click on the connection poll on your screen. I'm going to pause here and give folks some time to do that. All right. Before we get into the next presentation, I'd like to take a minute to define a few more terms you'll hear. As Vance mentioned, it's important to ground us all in shared definitions as we dive into this important content. So throughout today, we'll take a few minutes here and there to do that. In the next presentation, you'll hear about birth workers. A birth worker is a person who provides emotional support, general care, and advice to birthing women and people and families during pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum. There are lots of different types of birth workers, and examples include doulas, midwives, lactation consultants, and childbirth educators. In our next presentation, we'll hear more about doulas specifically. A doula is a trained professional who provides support, comfort, and education to women and birthing people from early pregnancy through the first months postpartum. They support in a number of ways, including labor and delivery, coaching, breastfeeding support, parenting, education, and making connections to related services. I'd now like to introduce Twyla from Health Connect one of the premier community-based doula training programs focused on Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities.
I was dismissed upon arrival. My voice was silenced at triage. No one asked about my trauma history as my cervix did the talking. I was sent home at midnight. Once arriving, I began to bleed and we turned back around. I didn't know that being Black, 18, and single would predestine me for a birth experience filled with judgment, bias, and disregard. I was in labor for 24 hours. My natural birth plan was disregarded. I labored on my back and was pushed interventions like narcotics, Pitocin, an epidural, and an episiotomy. I was threatened with a C-section. I was never offered lactation support. The whole process was dehumanizing. I had no idea at the time, but as I was in labor in Brooklyn, there was a community-based doula program growing in Chicago, Health Connect one, that I now have the privilege to lead 22 years later. No one told me in 1998 that having a community-based doula who looked like me would help me stick to my birth plan, find a comfortable laboring position, reduce the likelihood of epidural and C-section, and increase breastfeeding initiation. And to make it very plain, as a Black woman, increase my and my baby's chance of survival. At Health Connect one, we co-design community-based doula training programs with nonprofits and other organizations that support mothers and birthing families to make informed decisions during the perinatal period. Through our Train the Trainer model, we teach 10 trainers how to provide direct training to 30 community-based doulas to serve 300 or more families per year. Our programs put communities in touch with their own strengths, needs, skills, and collective power through our 5 essential components. Employ women who are from the community. Extend and intensify the role of a doula. Collaborate with community stakeholders. Facilitate experiential learning using the Health Connect one model, and value the doulas with salary and support. Our programs work. Health Connect one trained doulas have achieved astounding results. Specifically, for Black birthing people, we've reduced preterm birth by 19%, C-sections by 23%, low birth weight by 24%, and increased breastfeeding at 6 weeks by 22%. Over the next 5 years, we are working on an exciting development, a pathway to sustainability through Medicaid reimbursement. 4 states have already begun reimbursing doula care, and 17 more have legislation in consideration. Without community-based training of doulas, money will be absorbed by larger, white, non-community-based organizations. We are seeking implementation partners and funders to help us raise the $3 million we need to expand to 15 new sites with our training and provide stipends to pay the doulas. Looking back, I'm grateful for the doulas who ensured that I was listened to in my subsequent births. At Health Connect one, we won't stop until every birthing person's voice is heard and prioritized. Join our movement to build community-based doula training programs, a village of people reflective of the communities that need them most.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing your work with us, Twyla. So much of what you shared resonates personally for me. Doulas provide crucial support, and in my case, even though my doula wasn't in the birthing room with me due to COVID, her guidance beforehand put me in a position where I felt empowered to advocate for myself, and in the end, push back against a C-section, which I was threatened with. I was able to stick more closely to my birthing plan. I am so grateful to my doula. I love the work that Health Connect one is doing to make community-based doulas more prevalent and their work valued with salary. If you want to connect with Twyla and help her meet her goals to expand Health Connect One's community-based doula training program, please opt in by clicking the poll on your screen. And again, I will pause here and give folks time to do that. Okay, next we'll jump to Birth Center Equity, an organization that focuses on growing BIPOC-owned birthing centers in BIPOC communities. For anyone not familiar, a birth center is a freestanding home-like facility where prenatal, birth, and postpartum care is provided by midwives. And a community birth center is a birth center that provides safe, culturally relevant, midwifery-led maternal health care for all. Please join me in welcoming Leslie Welch from BCE.
Hi, I'm Leslie Welch, co-founder of Birth Center Equity. We are the first national network of birth centers led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color focused on growing and sustaining community birth infrastructure to improve maternal health outcomes in our communities. Maternal and infant health disparities in communities of color are facts we know all too well, but we also know what to do to change this. We know that when it comes to care, the birth center model of care lessens rates of preterm birth and low birth weight, reduces cesarean section, improves breastfeeding rates, and ensures families feel seen and heard and have a foundation on which to raise healthy, thriving children. Yet today, this model of care is not equitably available to people of color. Women of color call all the time and ask if there's a birth center open in their community, and all too often our answer is no. Studies show that the distribution of birth centers in the United States mirrors racial segregation, leaving communities of color without access to a model of care that can save lives. Racial inequities in wealth distribution and access to capital make it difficult for people of color to open and sustain community birth centers. Right now, there are less than 15 birth centers open, led by, and serving people of color out of more than 400 birth centers in the United States. Community birth centers are key to ending racial inequities in maternal health, growing community wellness, and making the U.S. a leader in maternal health care. Birth Center Equity ensures birth center leaders of color have access to funding and investment for startup and sustainability, creates leadership pipelines for needed skills and tools, and grows infrastructure to support all birth centers. We leverage the collective strength and visibility of our network to generate funding and investment with a focus on developing birth centers ready to open their doors, innovating sustainable community birth models, and reducing costs through economies of scale. We have grown a network of more than 30 established and developing community birth center leaders in 19 states, including 15 developing birth centers poised to open their doors by 2023. In our first year, Birth Center Equity raised over $1 million and distributed emergency rapid response and general operating funds to more than 25 birth centers. We are committed to raising $100 million over the next 10 years to exponentially grow our community's capacity for safe, culturally affirming, life-saving maternal health care. Today, we are inviting you, donors, funders, and investors, to partner with us and help us open 15 new birth centers led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color by 2023 and grow vibrant community birth infrastructure for generations to come.
What a powerful example of for us, by us. And we truly need more of that. If you want to connect with Leslie and support her vision for exponential growth of BIPOC-owned and led birthing centers in BIPOC communities, along with the infrastructure to support it, please opt in using the poll on your screen. As a reminder, today's event is about connections, and connections can take a number of forms. They could be following up with direct support on asks, or as simple as a follow-up conversation to learn more or provide feedback. So please take the time to connect with these incredible presenters. I will pause here again and let folks do that.
You've now heard from 3 amazing presenters whose organizations have a national focus. Now, let's shift to a few presenters who are deeply embedded in their local communities. First, we'll hear from Tia from Harambe Village Doulas, based in Dane County, Wisconsin.
Hello, my name is Tia Murray, and I am the founder and CEO of Harambe Village Doulas. We are a community-based doula agency working to dismantle inequities in maternal and child health outcomes. In Wisconsin, Black babies are not living to see their first birthday at 2 to 3 times the rate of white babies. Wisconsin is the worst in the nation for Black infant mortality, according to the CDC. Black mothers in Wisconsin are currently 5 times more likely than white mothers to die from pregnancy-related complications. At Harambe, we provide low to no cost prenatal, birth, and postpartum doula support, lactation education, as well as parenting support to birthing families. Additionally, we train and hire doulas from the local community. We also create the policy systems and environmental changes that are needed to ensure that Black mothers and babies not only have the opportunity to survive pregnancy and birth, but to thrive for many years. Let me illustrate this for you through the story of Mary. In early pregnancy, Mary needed support for substance use, but instead of receiving support services, she was jailed for the majority of her pregnancy. While in jail, Mary reached out to her doula, who she had connected with prior to being incarcerated. She shared her experience being shackled when taken to her prenatal appointments, laughed at when she asked for books to read about her pregnancy and her baby, and embarrassed when the male guards stayed in the room during her prenatal exam. Her doula, however, offered social and emotional support, childbirth education, as well as parenting support. Mary ultimately birthed a healthy, full-term baby with the support of her doula, and she received breastfeeding support, groceries, mental health services, baby supplies, and much more. When Mary got out of jail, she asked to join a doula training at Harambe Village so that she could go back into the jail and support other incarcerated parents just like herself. She was also hired as a parent consultant by our agency, making a livable wage. Since 2014, Harambe has trained over 50 doulas of color from local communities, and we've also served over 2,000 diverse families, primarily families of color, as well as Medicaid recipients. And we've done so through our community-based doula programming, as well as our Today Not Tomorrow Family Resource Center. Multiple studies have reinforced that doula involvement is a cost-effective method to improve birth outcomes for mothers and infants. At Harambe, some of our outcomes have included babies born at later gestational ages, that's less preterm birth, no instances of maternal mortality, and an almost 100% breastfeeding initiation rate. Harambe means let's pull together in the Swahili language. And we are asking you all to pull together with us for the health of Black mothers and babies. We are looking for funding as we scale and expand our reach through our mobile community care clinic, as well as our birth and family center. Additionally, we are interested in connecting with partners who can advise and support us with our growth and scale plans. Will you pull together with us?
Thank you, Tia. It's so inspiring to hear how Harambe Village Doulas is transforming communities and lives in Dane County. If you would like to pull together with Harambe Village and support them with funding and partnerships, please opt in now. And I'll leave the poll up for a little bit longer as well. Now let's hear from Charlie, co-founder of Birth Detroit, about how they're reclaiming Black maternal health through midwifery services and access to loving care.
Hello, I'm Charlie Snow, midwife and co-founder of Birth Detroit. I was 13 when my mother began experiencing complications during labor. Memories of the panic and fear in her eyes are all too familiar to the women I serve today. That experience almost 30 years ago fuels my life's work and commitment to Birth Detroit. Simply put, Michigan is failing its Black mothers. Barriers prevent Black moms from accessing the care they deserve. In Detroit, Black moms are 3 to 4 times more likely to die of birth-related complications. Birth center care addresses this inequality by reducing risk factors for complications and reducing insurance costs by more than $2,000 per birth. Yet, most insurers don't reimburse for birth center care, and there are no birth centers in Detroit and no Black-led birth centers in Michigan. It's time to do something different. Birth Detroit is reclaiming maternal child health in 2 key ways: by providing Black-led birth and midwifery services in Black communities, and by advocating for access to loving care for all birthing people. The Birth Detroit experience shifts high-quality care from the cold, impersonal, and bias-ridden environment of the hospital to a warm, home-like, and safe setting that centers each woman in her care, creating a sense of empowerment and trust. Access to these services is crucial. We work to establish insurance reimbursement so that every Black woman can affordably access care. What does birth center care look like? At our neighborhood midwifery clinic, midwives provide comprehensive, respectful prenatal and postpartum care that includes childbirth education and warm referrals to resources that address our clients' evolving needs. Our clinic team is most proud of our family satisfaction. One of our clients referred to our care as a movement. It's a movement because clients travel more than 100 miles to receive care from our team of Black midwives. It's a movement because our work is already leading to improved birth outcomes with 100% of our birthing clients breastfeeding. It's a movement because every woman should have access to this type of care and birthing experience. Since opening in October 2020, we've served more than 75 families in over 200 visits, and the demand is growing. In our recent survey, 98% of Detroiters feel birth center care is missing from their community. Our priorities include opening the Birth Detroit Birth Center, establishing reimbursement for long-term sustainability, and expanding our care clinics to 2 or more locations. We are seeking leadership gifts for our Birth Center's capital campaign and funding for clinic growth. We'd love to connect with policymakers, insurance payers, and others who want to make our vision for a better world possible. I got into this work because of my mother's experience, and I stay in it for the potential to change how Black women give birth in Detroit. Yes, she gave birth. Yes, she was safe, but she was lucky, and luck should have nothing to do with it. Now is the time to replace the fear I saw behind my mother's eyes with safety, trust, love, and justice.
It's so exciting to hear about the movement Birth Detroit is leading. Charlie and the folks at Birth Detroit invite you to lead with them in raising $1.5 million to open Detroit's first birth center. If you'd like to connect with Birth Detroit and help them achieve their vision, opt in to connect now. Next, let's turn to Birth Brown Cooperative, who is using cooperative economics to provide a living wage for birth workers, while also ensuring families can find qualified, culturally competent perinatal support providers. Join me in welcoming Marquis, CEO of Birth Brown Cooperative.
Historically, Black families have been exploited by the American gynecology system through non-consensual experimentation, free labor, and the eventual eradication of traditional Black midwives, who facilitated maternal infant health, not only for our communities, but all communities. As a result of centuries of racial malpractice, Black birthing people suffer from preventable complications and death far more frequently than their white peers. BIPOC providers have minimal support for upward mobility as business owners. It doesn't have to be this way. In 2019, I founded Birth Brown Co-op, recruiting like-minded BIPOC birth workers to create a cooperative of professionals who advocate and provide perinatal support for us, by us. Birth work is the first American trade. We have a vision of establishing BIPOC workers at the forefront of acknowledging it as just that. We exist for two reasons: to reduce the maternal infant health crisis in our communities, and to foster cooperative economics in birth and perinatal work for BIPOC providers. Birth Brown is a two-sided marketplace that ensures families can find and hire culturally competent perinatal providers. Families contact our agency through social media, our website, or phone. We begin by matching the family with a screened perinatal provider from our co-op. For birth workers, we take care of the business so our providers can focus on the work they love, which means membership in the co-op is an obvious and desirable choice. We provide a full suite of back-ended administrative services, trainings, classes, resources, and other opportunities to help our members grow and strengthen as professionals. The result, families can access the support they need, and birth workers are empowered by a supportive community. Black people have used cooperative economics to build generations of ownership, stability, and wealth. For Birth Brown, this means that our birth traditions and communities' needs are at the forefront. Standards and pay are set by us, avoiding and learning from the exploitation we experience in spaces that don't prioritize us. Our goal is to empower birth workers who can then empower our communities in all aspects of reproductive health and family services. In the words of one of our perinatal providers, without Birth Brown support, mentorship, and resources, I would still be struggling to navigate how to make this calling a reality. Right now, we have 12 members in our co-op, 6 of whom we successfully supported through lactation certification courses with our lactation professional program. Our 3-year plan is to expand to 200 members, allowing us to serve over 1,000 families a year, and launch our full suite of programs, including classes for parents, birth work courses, expanding our lactation and other professional programs, and building out our robust online portal. From there, we hope to expand beyond the Philly metro area to serve the Mid-Atlantic region. So how can you help? We want to build partnerships with like-minded individuals and organizations, but our dreams are big and they need financial support. We're looking for committed funding to bolster our startup activities and to enable us to launch our new programs and strengthen our existing ones.
Thank you, Marquis. If you want to connect with Marquis and help Birth Brown strengthen existing programs and launch new ones, please opt in to connect now. As a reminder, connections can take many forms. They could be direct support on asks, introductions to partners who you think would be supportive. I see a couple of those coming in, or as simple as a follow-up conversation to learn more. Now let's hear from Joy from Equity Before Birth, who's infusing economic justice with birth justice to improve health outcomes and eliminate disparities in North Carolina.
Tia worked overtime while pregnant to save money because she didn't have paid leave for postpartum recovery. Her water broke prematurely during one of her shifts. Despite doing everything she could to prepare for her new baby, the money and time she saved did not cover the unexpected and extended NICU stay. By the time the baby was able to come home, Tia had exhausted her resources. The dilemma became go back to work to keep a roof over her head while losing time to help the baby reach critical milestones, or remain at home with no income, risking utility disconnection, food insecurity, and homelessness. My name is Joy Spencer, and I'm the Executive Director of Equity Before Birth. We fuse economic justice with birth justice to improve health outcomes and eliminate disparities. We provide families like Tia's additional support for a healthy transition into parenthood. Unfortunately, Tia's situation is far too common. 62.2% of working Black adults cannot afford to take unpaid time off work. And 1 in 4 American moms return to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. Equity Before Birth prioritizes financial security as a means to improve birth and health outcomes in North Carolina. We eliminate financial barriers by supporting BIPOC families in 3 main ways. We provide supplemental income for working families who do not receive paid leave benefits from their employer. We cover the cost of perinatal support services while simultaneously investing in BIPOC birth work, and we provide direct cash assistance for essential baby or pregnancy-related items. In Tia's case, we supplied paid leave to allow her more time to better prepare mentally, physically, and emotionally for her new journey as a parent. This financial cushion helped her maintain positive mental health and nurture her infant's development. She was able to secure quality childcare and make a smooth return to work. And yes, baby was able to reach all milestones with flying colors. Our model breaks silos by promoting collaboration among local early childhood service providers. In partnership, we wrap each family around comprehensive support. There is a clear demand for our services. Since beginning operations on October 1st of 2020, over 100 families have contacted us for support. We have received over $250,000 in donations and an additional $30,000 in grant awards. Our successful fundraising efforts as a public charity organization has enabled us to provide 15 Black birthing people with paid leave, over $50,000 in payments directly to Black families and birth workers, and over 250 hours of direct contact doula and perinatal health education services. We are just getting started. We need your help as we expand our services statewide and eventually pilot our model to other states. We are seeking funding and investment partners who care about our commitment to community and equity. Please join us in improving birth outcomes, eliminating maternal health disparities, and supporting Black families. Help us ensure families like Tia's are able to thrive.
It's so inspiring to hear how Joy has been stepping in to provide paid leave and financial support for birthing people in North Carolina to ensure healthy birth outcomes, while also supporting and uplifting the ecosystem of BIPOC birth workers. If you'd like to connect with Joy and help her scale her work throughout North Carolina and beyond, please opt in now. While we have selected a great group of presenters for today's event, we know that there is so much more innovation in birth equity and justice happening across the country in support of BIPOC women and birthing people. So please check out our innovation glossary for examples of other orgs doing great work to advance birth equity and justice. 2 great orgs in our innovation glossary are Common Sense Childbirth, ran by Jenny Joseph, that operates and advocates for community-based birth centers, runs training programs for midwives and other perinatal support professionals, and runs a national perinatal task force to start and grow perinatal safe spots in the US to eliminate race and class disparities in birth outcomes. And Birth Matters, an accredited Health Connect One community doula program, improving health equity by ensuring improved access to affordable and culturally relevant care in South Carolina.
We've heard a number of stats on Black women and birthing people, and unfortunately, their negative experiences with the medical system. For this next section, we'll highlight a few presenters who are innovating to change that reality. First up is Earth, an organization that's working towards putting power into the hands of birthing people to hold medical providers accountable for their service. Please join me in welcoming Kimberly Seals-Allers.
Amber Rose Isaacs, Shalon Irving, Sha'asia Washington, Sabrina De La Rosa, Tatia French, Yolanda Kadima, Dr. Shanice Wallace, Kira Johnson. These are just a few of the Black mothers who have died during or after childbirth in recent years. In fact, Black women are 243% more likely to die during this time, and racism and bias in care is a root cause of this inequity. Current solutions such as anti-bias trainings just aren't working. There's no accountability. And instead of transparency, what we have is just tick the anti-bias training box. But imagine a world where bias-free care was a human right, where Black mothers were allowed to live out their lives, and all of these mothers were still here with us and with their babies. My name is Kimberly Sales-Allers, and I'm the founder of Earth, as in the word birth, but we drop the B for bias. Earth is a one-of-a-kind digital platform on a mission to eliminate racism and bias in maternal and infant care. Earth has a dual market role, serving both consumers and hospital systems. First, our Yelp-like review and rating app allows Black and brown birthing people to find and leave reviews of prenatal, birthing, and pediatric experiences of care at doctors and hospitals. This is critical because 21% of people of color have avoided seeking health care due to fears about racial discrimination. With Earth, people of color have a digital platform where they can learn from and lean into their community as a trusted resource. Quite simply, we help hospitals learn from the living. By detecting early signs of bias to prevent adverse events, Earth creates community-driven feedback loops that lead to more respectful and equitable maternal and infant care. Our users are elated. Our app had over 3,000 downloads in the first week, with reviews from 48 states plus Hawaii. And hospitals are listening. We recently launched our first hospital pilot in Detroit, with others in the works in LA, New York, and Philadelphia, demonstrating the power of Earth's data in bringing equity to quality improvement and patient safety. Now we're ready to grow with your help. Earth has raised over $600,000 in grants, but we are coming to the end of this funding cycle. We're looking for grant funding to build the next iteration of Earth, increase the analytic capabilities, and expand marketing and engineering. We also need advisors and business partners to support our successful transition to a for-profit social enterprise. Our goal is to become the good housekeeping seal of approval for Black and brown birthing people, such that every hospital serving our communities wants to earn Earth approval. Join us. Together, we can make birth without bias a reality for all.
Yes, yes, yes to all the data. Wow, I just wish I had known about this tool for myself. This is powerful, and I can just imagine how valuable this data can be for hospitals and providers. If you're excited about Earth's potential and want to help them grow, please opt into making a connection by clicking the poll on your screen. Thank you all for taking the time to make those connections. They are so important for our incredible presenters. All right, next up is Astardi Medical, a company that makes a tool that improves NICU care by identifying disparities. Please join me in welcoming Tracy Warren, CEO of Astardi.
Every year, 380,000 babies are born too soon, the tiniest of which weigh less than a pound and can fit in the palm of your hand. Hello, I'm Tracy Warren, co-founder and CEO of Astardi Medical, and I'm here to talk to you about the challenges and disparities these babies face in the most unlikely of places, the neonatal ICU. Many preterm infants spend the first 2 to 3 months of their life in the NICU. To grow well and develop properly, these babies have unprecedented nutritional needs. Remember Michael Phelps' diet in the Beijing Olympics? A preterm infant needs the same calories per pound to support its growth, with 50% dedicated to its brain. However, today, half of preterm infants fail to grow properly, and as a result, they experience higher rates of infection, lung and GI disease, as well as developmental challenges, including cerebral palsy and school difficulties. Worse yet, for Black infants, the risk of disease and infection is 2 to 4 times that of their white counterparts. However, feeding these babies is incredibly complex. There's no playbook to inform NICU teams how much and how often to feed a baby. The current system is ripe for bias and errors. So how do we level the playing field for our nation's most vulnerable? By integrating an evidence-based solution to drive standardization, illuminate disparities, and create accountability. Our solution, NICUtrition, liberates data already in a hospital's electronic health record, embeds feeding guidelines, and tracks infant growth and outcomes. An algorithm-driven feeding schedule reduces the complexity of calculations and decreases subjectivity and bias. NICUtrition captures unit-wide performance data, allowing hospital administrators to ask critical questions. Are Black infants growing as well as their white counterparts? Which doctors are advancing feed rates faster for white infants than Blacks? As you can appreciate, being in the NICU places a substantial burden on infants and their families, emotionally and financially. NICUtrition has been demonstrated to reduce length of stay and improve growth for all infants. Over the next 5 years, we can give 70,000 NICU families an additional 350,000 days together at home, improving bonding and reducing stress. By optimizing and equitably delivering care, NICUtrition will lower the incidence of disease, reduce disparities, and improve long-term neurodevelopmental outcomes. Introductions are key to our success. We can dramatically impact the cost of care for payers, particularly Medicaid, which covers more than half of preterm infant expenses. For health system administrators and board members who've made a commitment to health equity, NICUtrition can help them be successful today. And finally, we seek impact-forward investors who can help us realize our vision sustainably. Please join us and advocate for these precious little fighters who don't yet have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's pretty disheartening to hear about the disparities that exist for these little ones at such a young and vulnerable age. The work that you're doing to shed light on what's happening in the NICU setting is so important. If you can help a Stardy with an introduction or connection, please click yes on the poll. And I see some comments in the chat about wanting to connect with presenters. If you've missed any of the polls, you can still opt in using our follow along website. So I'll just ask one of my colleagues to redrop that link into the chat. So if you want to connect with anyone that you missed the poll for, or you think about it later, you can feel free to go on the website and still opt in.
We at Promise know that social entrepreneurs are also involved in policy innovation. And as Kylie from the National Birth Equity Collaborative mentioned much earlier in the event, advocating for state and federal legislation is critical. And we know that policy change is such an important tool for advancing birth equity and justice, and that policy can ultimately change the behavior of institutions and drive broader systemic change. With that being said, I'm so excited to shift to part 2 of the event, where you'll get the chance to hear part of a panel on the most comprehensive state birth equity legislation passed to date, the Birth Equity Bill Package in Colorado. It was successfully signed into law this month and can serve as a model for other states. This panel was such a joy to participate in, and I hope you'll find it as inspirational and energizing as I did. Before we dive in, I do want to provide a little bit more background on the Birth Equity Bill Package. So the Colorado Birth Equity Bill Package is 3 bills: Senate Bill 193, the protection of pregnant people in the perinatal period; Senate Bill 194, addressing maternal health providers; and Senate Bill 101, which continues the direct entry midwives program. Senate Bill 193 establishes basic human rights standards in the perinatal care for all people, including those who are incarcerated. So under this bill, for example, every birthing person is allowed to have a companion or doula with them during birth, in addition to their partner or spouse. This bill also establishes requirements for facilities that incarcerate or have custody of people with the capacity for pregnancy. So very critical. Senate Bill 194 aligns perinatal care data and systems for equity. Under this bill, for example, healthcare providers licensed to provide labor and delivery have to implement best practices related to collaboration in the transfer of a pregnant person from home or a birthing center to a health facility, which, as you'll hear from a midwife on our panel, is critical. And finally, Colorado Senate Bill 101 supports the integration of midwifery care through continuing the direct entry midwifery program. With that, I'm so excited to introduce Indra, founder and director of Elephant Circle, State Representative Leslie Herod, Certified Home Midwife Demetra Saricki, Brianna Simmons, the Black Women's Health, Healing, and Joy Coordinator from Soul to Soul Sisters, and Kayla Frawley, Manager of Policy and Advocacy at Clayton Early Learning. Let's hear more about the birth equity bill package from this panel of trailblazers now.
The reason why that's so hard and leads to disastrous outcomes is not because people don't identify their own pain or their own issues. It's because they're not believed in the system, especially when they're being reported by women of color, but also by women and by people who are outside the gender binary. They're just not believed in the system. They're just not seen as credible. And we need advocates who first start with believing us, right? In order to get the help that we need. And these folks are the practitioners who do that work.
So to kick it off, Indra, maybe I'll start with you and then anybody else can jump in. What is the birth equity bill package and why is it needed?
It's a set of bills that collectively cover over 24 different policy areas that we think will start to address inequities in birth outcomes. It's needed because of those inequities. But it's also needed because care that everyone receives in the United States during the perinatal period is inadequate and subpar. We have some of the worst quality of care at the highest cost in the world. We're paying more and getting less than people in other countries. And so when there are disparities, I think it really emphasizes how poor the poorest care is in this country because it's subpar for our best outcomes. And when there's a disparity, especially based on race, that's, inequitable, that means, there's really a profound gap and we can do better.
And I'd like to add that the bills in particular move theory to action, which is really important. Structures and institutions have the evidence. The evidence is widely available. And so when we review current recommendations and current literature, oftentimes we, in theory, recognize the shortfalls and the poor outcomes. However, we, as a community, there are very few leaders who will actually take and move those theories into a legislative process. And that's exactly what these bills did.
I would just add that the bills set a standard of care. They also set a standard of accountability for a healthcare system. And on top of that, and one of the things that I think is most important about these bills is that it's responsive to community needs. Indra spoke to it a little bit, but over the years, I've been in Colorado for 6 years, and many of the people on this panel have been here much longer than I have. But when I entered into the birth worker field here in Colorado, communities were very loud and very clear about their experiences. And I think that this bill package finally addresses many aspects of what they were asking for.
And the thing that I think is the beauty of this package is that not only does it change points in the system that need to change that will lead to better outcomes for everyone. It also expands the system so that if you choose not to give birth in a traditional way, or you are in an untraditional setting, that you're still going to have good health outcomes, and that there still will be accountability there, which I think is important. Including doulas and midwives into the process is very important. Giving them the respect, right, and the accountability that they need to serve women is extremely important. And quite frankly, it's a direction that more women of color are going in right now because of the disastrous outcomes in the traditional healthcare setting. And these bills really bring those different ideas and worlds together in a way that I think will truly be transformative, or at least begin on the process of transformation, so that we can change those health outcomes, not only in Colorado, but across the country.
I think for me as a practitioner, it was important to close the loopholes, particularly being an out-of-hospital midwife. Oftentimes having to navigate those structures and systems is quite complex. And in an emergency situation, time is of the essence. And needing to navigate is something that I shouldn't have to do, not when there are lives on the line. And so these bills help to ensure that when those instances do occur, that those intersections will be met with less resistance and trauma. And I think that's really important.
So I'd love to pivot and hear a little bit about that, listening to the community, work that you all had done, and kind of the roles that each of you had kind of played in that. Indra, I know when we had talked, you mentioned that this comes off of kind of decades of like listening, deep listening to community. Would love to hear, kind of each of you talk about like, what was that process like, and what was your role kind of in that process, and how that then transformed into kind of what went into the birth equity bills.
I have this in front of me. So this is the Diverse Colorado Voices report. And our friend Shelby Irvin, who was a huge leader in this report, is on the cover, who's also in El Paso County with Demetra. And we were able to hear from 77 birth equity leaders around the state, the majority of them being birth workers out of the hospital system, but perinatal professionals and or parents, and majority of them were BIPOC Coloradans. And so we asked them what were the biggest issues and what are the best solutions to issues that we see in the perinatal time period or in infant and maternal care. And the top 3 issue buckets were, number 1 was systemic racism. And so we heard, a lot of different stories of folks that had experienced explicit racism, and how that impacted their pregnancy and their postpartum up to 2 years. And then the second bucket was lack of postpartum supports, more predominantly lack of lactation supports and mental health supports. And then the third bucket was systems level inadequacies. That's when a lot of Coloradans talked about how we have, insurance policies that are very inequitable. They don't allow for folks to choose which provider they'd like to go with. They don't allow folks a lot of autonomy in the care that they receive.
Elephant Circle started in 2009. And that was even a few years after I knew personally that working in this field, which was barely even a field at the time, was my calling. And because it was a small nonprofit, I could really just grow it incrementally in response to what I was hearing from community. Of course, I was informed by my own experience as a queer person starting a family in Colorado. I was also deeply informed by somebody who's so deeply connected to this land and this region. I was able to really see imprinted here in this space the difference between how my great-grandmother, who gave birth 11 times in Colorado, before there was the kind of healthcare infrastructure we see today. But knowing that the kind of wisdom she brought to that experience was essentially replaced by this other system that we now see so clearly is a failed system.
That framework of conversation, as Indra referenced, comes from the perspective of working in community, being with community, and not just hearing their stories and wanting to amplify them, but again, moving those stories to a place where they could be heard. And just like Representative Harris mentioned earlier, BIPOC communities, communities of color, and our non-binary folks are not heard, and not being heard, they are not being believed, and in not being believed, they are at an extraordinarily high risk of infant or maternal mortality. So having the ability to have conversations with community members, being able to make connections, which was a big part of my piece of the stakeholder process, was being able just to connect the dots, connect community with other organizations who were also working to bring this package forward, such as the surveys and the community engagement that Kayla is referencing too.
At the time that I entered the conversation, there were actually a lot of proposed legislation on the table for addressing maternal health. And to my understanding, many of those things didn't move forward because the community said, wait, we aren't a part of this process at all. How is it that these things can move forward without it being informed, truly informed by our lived experiences? And so with my role as a doula, I felt it very important to utilize the uniqueness of my role in having very close personal relationships and having had built trust with the families that I was working with to be an advocate for the things that they were communicating that they needed to be reflected in policy and legislation. And so a lot of my role was utilizing my voice to speak to some of the issues that I was gathering from their experiences, but also to help mobilize other Black doulas in our state to get involved with the process as well.
What advice do you have for people who might say, like, this is well, everybody's going to say this is incredible, but what do you advise to people that say, I hear this and now I'm inspired to go and do something. I want to do this in my state or in my community. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, I'll start by just saying, seek out people who are already doing the work. Because undoubtedly there are folks in the community that are doing the work. There are doulas, there are midwives, there are elephant circles in a lot of our communities. Because the outcomes have been so bad, we have had to do something different, and those professions I mentioned are really exploding. There are a lot of amazing trained and supportive midwives and doulas that we need to lift up. And so I would say seek that out. And if it's not there, build a community of people who care about these issues, who look like the communities that are most impacted, and then move the work from there.
It is possible, and I think important, to do policy like this with community in the lead. So if you are in one of those agency positions or institutions, this is an opportunity for you to step back, to take a more listening position, to let community lead. And if you're part of community and you feel like it's insurmountable and overwhelming and daunting, let us be here to tell you that it's possible, that you can do this.
So when you're asking parents and birthing people and people of varying identities to show up fully in a way and to share their stories, sometimes those stories can be very traumatic and can bring up a lot of things for people. So ensuring that people are compensated for their time, ensuring that people have the resources in the interim to address their basic needs. Those types of things can really dignify the legislative process in a way that's absolutely necessary, and that was utilized in this process as well.
Such an inspiring panel highlighting such amazing advocacy and legislative work that truly advances perinatal racial equity. To make connections easier, Indra and the team at Elephant Circle have agreed to be the point people for connecting with the folks involved in the Birth Equity Bill package. So if you'd like to connect with Elephant Circle, please opt in to doing so now. I see a lot of connections rolling in. And again, thank you so much. They are so important for everybody presenting and for advancing this work.
Thank you all for taking the time to connect. Throughout today's event, we have heard about the maternal and infant health crisis facing BIPOC birthing women and people and their children. And we've heard from passionate and committed individuals whose organizations are tirelessly working to make change happen through promising innovations in birth equity and justice. We also know that in this event, we've highlighted only a slice of the innovation happening across our nation. Our work at Promise is about making connections. So we welcome connections to more programs and more experts doing great work in this field. Please get in touch with us if you have ideas.
And thanks again to our incredible co-hosts and partners and supporters. And of course, thanks, big thanks to our extraordinary speakers from today who began this journey to prepare for you months ago and who look forward to speaking with you soon. And now that you've cracked open that door of collaboration a little bit further, you may be wondering what comes next. You'll get an email with more information, including contact information for every venture you opted to connect with today. The venturers will also receive your contact information and they have plans to reach out to you. But you don't need to wait to hear from them. If you have feedback, a question, or an idea, reach out directly to these ventures. If you see potential for collaboration, schedule time for a one-on-one to talk more. And we hope you'll join us in 2 weeks for the next installment in our Show and Tell series on equity and justice in early childhood, Show and Tell equity and justice in early care and education. And finally, I saw a couple people mentioning the artwork in the chat. The artwork in today's presentation is by Loren J. Turner, and her artwork is Loren J. Turner Fine Art, who is a stay-at-home mother, birth worker herself, and an artist. She uses acrylic paint to normalize breastfeeding and childbirth. To check out more of her amazing work, please go to laurenjturnerfineart.com.
Again, I really hope you're leaving today's event feeling inspired and with a new perspective on the incredible work taking place across the field. And I hope that you'll see this moment as a call to action to drive continued innovation in birth equity and justice. We have to come together to give birthing women, people, and their children the support they need. And I just want to double click on what Van said. This event is about connection. So please take the time to go back, go to our follow along website, connect with folks if you didn't get a chance to do that before. There's incredible work happening and all of these presenters and their organization deserve your support. Thank you again for taking the time to be here with us today. Take care and stay safe.